it's so much harder to go over these units since we have the Wednesday-Monday schedule rather than Monday-Wednesday on the same topic, because I fear everybody kind of forgets what happened before. So, I'm going to go back to my outline again, and I hope you take these outlines very seriously, because basically each of these units, if you can answer all the stuff here, you can pass two, because it's going to be one of these will be one of the questions on the essay, whereas the capital words will be the ones that will be in part one. So if you can do this, but we want to think about it not in isolation, but the whole unit. Okay, so what we did last time was looked at the introduction and definition of essentially diglossia. And if you still don't have diglossia, we'll talk a little bit about it more, but then on Thursday you want to review it more. And then we started, and we looked at the classical article by Susan Gall and defined why that was the classical article. And now we're going to look at part two, case studies of different communities. We did only one of them, the Dominican one, but I'm going to mention two others. And then we're going to look at whole societies. That was today's assignment, the Moroccan society. So what we want to do in each of them, okay, what do all these things have in common? That there is some issue of diglossia involved, right? Or triglossia, or bilingualism and diglossia, or here is a fancy word, where is it post-diglossic language continuum? Sounds very fancy, but it still always has to do with two or more languages. Glossia sounds better because language, we tend to think of like an official national language, but there are all kinds of levels of languages and dialects and all that. So that's why diglossia could be two languages, could be a dialect with no writing in a language, it could be whatever. So the central word is diglossia, triglossia, multiglossia, post-colonial diglossia, etc. And the other central thing is perhaps the central word in all this course, particularly in the second part of the course, is identity. How do you perform your identity? How do you feel your identity? Through language, just like you do by how you dress and other things in your religion, but the language constantly. Now, obviously, if you are not, like so many people in this society are monolinguals, well, you still perform your identity. You know, you could talk hip-hop-ish or uptight professor-ish or whatever. You still have ways of talking within a single language different ways. But think if you have in your community or your whole nation or your immigrant community some sort of diglossic or bilingual or whatever possibilities, well, that allows you or forces you to perform your identity, not just by what you eat and where you pray and what clothes you wear, but how you talk, not just in registers and so forth, but which language you use when and how. And on top of that, so I said first diglossia, and then I said identity, and I'm saying only third, I'm saying gender, even though we're going to pay most attention to the gender. But the reason I say gender third, because, for example, in a society like Morocco that we're going to deal with today, or the classic Gall article about the village and the women going off to work in the bra factory, that diglossia, or lack thereof, by someone in that community, affects everybody of every gender. It's that they perform it and use it for their identity in different ways. Okay? So first, we have to determine, for each of these case studies that we're looking at, where is this place? What are the two or more languages being used? There's always a high and a low, but nevertheless, as we talked about Nuyorican, for example, it's a very different case than Moroccan Arabic, where the low language for Nuyorican is Spanish, but it's not a low language worldwide, okay? So we have to look at where it's spoken, what are the two or more glossias spoken, and only then can we look at what their gendered roles are. And also if it's, and who are the group in that place? Like we looked at Dominican last time, and that's only a large immigrant group, but an immigrant group. Doesn't mean New York is diglossic Dominican, right? So it's only a group within there. Where in Morocco, although not everybody is equally diglossic, if they were, there would be less gender performativity or class performativity involved. But intra-society, that is in the whole society is known as diglossic. So it's all over the society. You may be more diglossic than she is because she's a peasant and she has no education and you went to fancy French school, but you're in that same society, okay? So what we want to do, and this is, if it's going to be the question on the test, this is what I'm going to ask you to compare and contrast various societies, okay? So let's go over those very quickly by way of review, the ones we already did, and then we'll do the other ones today. And sometimes, and most of the time, we're going to see it's the women in a given society who are going to make more use of this. Not always, but most of the time. Why might that be? Have you thought about that yet? Why might that be? Yes?
I mean, maybe it's something to do with, like they want to like perform both like high and low.
But why do they want to do that?
Because like performing the lower register gives them a sense of solidarity with other women, and then performing high gives them upward social mobility.
But doesn't it give that to men too?
But the thing is, men have like
They have. You can end the sentence there.
Yeah.
So this is something, and the Arabic one we see it really well, because here, the very first one, so to answer that question, we're going to answer it in more detail, but it gives the women something else because they have less to start with, right? So it gives them another potential tool. Some women, because that Berber woman that you are now in this story for this today, is living in a village and is a monolingual Berber, so she's getting nothing out of that. But so it doesn't mean every woman is, but the woman who went to that school, now it allows her to, in reality or in her fantasy, to escape in some way, or in traveling, or in whatever. Okay. So the very first example, which was our prologue, tying in this unit with the last one, was the Saudi chicklet, right? So, what are the two languages involved? So let's go. Saudi, we know the place, Saudi Arabia, okay, we got that. What are the two languages involved? English, well, first is, that's not the first one, okay. Okay, you can start with English because that's the high language here, yes, okay. So the high language is English, and what is the other language?
Saudi Arabic.
Saudi Arabic. Now, is that a low language like Berber? No. So that's really the national language there. But in this context, it's still functioning, relatively speaking, not in the same way as that chart in Gaal, but because English is the prestige, westernized, freedom, etc., right? So the women who write English, what do they achieve by that? Oh, and who are they? Again, not the maid, not the women who have been educated, who have access to English. And what are they performing? What is the woman's role? We wrote that on the board. I'm a, because I can do this, cosmopolitan woman. That is global rather than local. Write that down too, because that's going to be relevant also. So that allows them to enter into the global world. If nothing else in their fantasy, as it said in these articles, it says in this article that what they're doing is a fantasy escape, like romance novels do altogether. But it can also, it means if they are allowed to get on an airplane and leave, they can talk English, they can see foreign movies, they can read foreign books, maybe they can go to a foreign university, right? Maybe they can get a job because they speak English. So it is also the English, and there's so many other articles here we're not going to be able to talk about, like in Japan and China, where learning English is one of the big ways that women have symbolic capital. But it's not just symbolic capital. Language is symbolic capital, but it becomes real capital in the sense that you speak English and you can get a good job, and therefore you will have a better job and actually more capital, right? So it is a way, what we saw in Gaal on a very low level. Let's go back to Gaal. What did she say? This was this peasant community. What did the women achieve? Did they go off to Paris and speak English and get good jobs in computers? No, for one thing, it was 1960s that she did her analysis. What did those women achieve in that first article you were supposed to read? Well, if you don't read any of them, it can't be just one person who reads it, yes.
And they got one job in the bra factory, and two, they got like better husbands.
Yeah, they got a job in the bra factory, but that was already a step out of not being a peasant and shoveling shit for their peasant guys in the village, but going to work in the bra factory, hence going into town, hence learning enough German to grab an Austrian guy and make a whole identity change. They didn't even want to end up being diglossic after a while. They wanted to just become assimilated totally. So maybe you only get the job in the bra factory, or maybe you're in Saudi Arabia and you speak English and you get a big computer job or something like that. It doesn't matter, it's a vehicle to have more. And so therefore it's always more important to women. And also because, as we'll see very wonderfully in the Catalan article and the Barcelona article, for many of the men, speaking another language threatens their masculinity. Because, and that's we're going to see here, but we're not there yet. Okay, so article number 1 then, Saudi Arabia, do we have the roles there, what its function is? Article number 2, and it's not really, this diglossia in Saudi Arabia, of course, is only a very small percentage of the population. Most people do not speak English, so it's definitely very class bound, okay? Then we, in contrast to the second prologue we had, the review of the book about Yiddish. And what do we say there? There we have an internal bilingualism, because the whole society, even if each member doesn't know these 3 languages, the whole society functions around, what are the 3 languages?
Hebrew, Yiddish,
and whatever. Let's say Polish or Hungarian or English if they've moved here, right? So there is what is the high language, obviously? Hebrew. It is not spoken. It is like Latin is, or a classical Arabic. And so, traditionally, essentially, only the men learn it. So in that case, while the one we just saw in Saudi Arabia, there are more women who probably speak good English than men. In this community, the women, because it's a religious language where English is the language of the outside world or capitalism or something, but has nothing to do with religion. So Hebrew, only the boys learn Hebrew seriously, and the women just learn a few prayers. So the women really don't have access to the Hebrew, especially not in a religious household. So what do they speak? What is the home language is Yiddish. But what is the advantage of Yiddish then? You said it before.
the solidarity.
Solidarity and even more, intimacy, not just solidarity, because solidarity is between you and me as friends, but intimacy, mother and child, and the kids who were raised in that, the first language of love, and that's why it's called Mama Loshen, mother tongue, as in English we say that also. And then there is the local language wherever they happen to be living. What Yiddish doesn't have, and Hebrew didn't have, now it has, but Yiddish doesn't, it had no country. So while Saudi Arabians speak it in their own country, and Catalan is part of the country, at least, Yiddish had no land, and Hebrew had no land. And until it had a land, Hebrew here's that quote, it's so wonderful, I'm going to repeat it where they say, because the second page of this article really shows you what it means for a language to be gendered, metaphorically gendered in the imagination of people. What did they say? The association of Yiddish with women in the home and intimacy suggests that Yiddish is, quote, like a woman, because it's subordinate to Hebrew, because that's the high language, that's the learned language, that's the classical language, in the same way that women are subordinate to men. So the gendering of language has to do with social, misogynist, economic, and all of these factors, right? So this is the metaphor, although this article says this of Yiddish, it works for every language. Now, these are the languages, the only case where some big change happened, and when Israel was formed, actually, that was formed in 48, but when more people started going there, more Jews started going back to their area, they did something very unusual historically that really had never been done before. It was